Hey everybody, Mike here. Before I read fantasy novel, because fantasy isn't literature, I want to give a little bit of a preface, if you will. I started looking up every anti-fantasy article, video I could find. A lot of college professors, a lot of people who haven't read much fantasy, just trashing the genre. With that anger, I decided to start writing this. Right now, I want you to pay attention to King Kelvin. There's a lot of characters in this. There's a lot of characters I really like, but King Kelvin and his character arc mainly is what I want you to pay attention to. So, this book is in my portfolio, but it's not really meant to be read. It's really meant to be performed. And I'm going to be doing that today. So, the book is titled Fantasy Novel, because fantasy isn't literature. Kelvin sat on his dark throne, his armor cool to the touch from the brisk air blowing against it. His hair, long and dark, would often blow into his eyes, obscuring his vision and become a minor annoyance, or get caught on his grisly scruff, since he usually shaves every other day or so. Kelvin is an evil king. He wouldn't say he is evil, but he has been very successful in becoming a king and waging war, which we all know is evil. His lands haven't seen war in over a decade, maybe because the nobles he appointed are too greedy, or his enemies from other lands are too afraid of just how evil Kelvin is. In battle, as all powerful kings do, he marches on the front lines, decimating entire armies with his powerful sword, or staff, or scepter. Ring? No, it's definitely a sword. He obtained this almighty weapon that you would imagine the story would be about from a great demon that he sold his soul to. Or maybe the weapon has an evil soul of its own. The only thing I can promise you is he didn't get this sword from a stone, because Kelvin is evil. But this story isn't about the sword Kelvin carries. If it were about the sword, it would have a really cool name. Its name would be a compound word. The first part of the word would be an important noun, like king, or world, or oath. And the second part of the word would be a past tense noun that has the verb in it, like killer, or breaker, or slayer. But this story isn't about the sword. Kelvin's throne sits in the entryway to his castle. He does not hide from would-be assassins or those who wish to openly disagree with him. He sits in open view, barely even protection from the elements. To the left of the throne, in a normal chair much lower than Kelvin's high seat, sits Vester. Vester is the personal bodyguard to the king, the highest honor one can achieve in the army. Vester wants to be here only because he supports how evil his king is. Not because his honor means his two daughters get to study with the palace scholars, or his family is guaranteed a home and comforts if he should die protecting the king, but because he is evil. The guard protecting the king is something we never think about, is it? Not only is he usually the most skilled and decorated soldier in the army, but he usually dies easiest to the protagonist before fighting the king. To the right of the throne, the evil king's throne, sits his advisor. Since Kelvin is so evil, we would assume his advisor would be a wretch or a dark wizard's understudy. But actually, Pavlo is a really cool guy. When he isn't collecting reports from nobles, scribing citizens' complaints, or giving advice to his kings, he likes to bake. Pavlo wakes up early and bakes pies and cakes that are sold at the tavern throughout the day. His twin sister Persephone runs the tavern and collects the profits. Since Pavlo makes enough money to own the home he and his sister live in, he lets her keep the money till she can be wed. Since she is a woman, she obviously can't own a home herself, and her living with Pavlo stops people from asking why he isn't married, since he isn't devoted to the church. On this particularly cold day, there was a large number of people in Kelvan's hall. Some were villagers that have come from far away to bring issues to their king. Because Kelvan is so evil, he normally offers them food, a place to stay that night, and food for the return journey, in addition to helping with their issues as much as possible. All was relatively standard until a screaming woman came walking up the stairs. Haggardly and unkempt, the woman was wearing rags and was very unbecoming in the face. She carried a knotted walking stick and had a hunched back. As she limped across the chamber, she moaned, "A curse upon this land! Evil will spread!" I know what you were thinking. Witches and prophecies? Obviously this is fantasy, and fantasy isn't literature. But no, this witch and this prophecy are from Shakespeare, because he used these all the time. And go ahead, tell me Shakespeare isn't literature. Anyway, back to the witch. Kelvan rose from his dark throne. "Let her pass!" At his command, all the subjects in the hall part ways to allow the witch to deliver the message to her king. "Tell me of this evil woman. Why does it come into my kingdom?" "An evil will come from an honest choice. And you," she raises a crooked finger at the king, "will lose your kingdom." Vester drew his sword. "Your words are treason, witch!" With his sword drawn, the bodyguard marched towards the woman. "Vester, I gave no order against this woman. Let her be." Kelvan turned towards Pavlo, his advisor. "Fetch me Vygar immediately." Pavlo jumped up and ran towards the cathedral on the opposite end of town. Kelvan probably wants Vygar so he can task him to rid this country of this evil that has been prophesied. Vygar is a righteous man. When he goes to war, he goes in the name of God and kills women and children righteously. He's also a holy man. He taxes the land for the church and pillages towns in the name of the church and takes all their treasure for the church he owns because he is holy and righteous. As Vygar enters the king's chamber, he kneels before his king. "You summon me, my lord?" "This woman has shared a prophecy, and evil will come from an honest choice, and my kingdom will fall. A child has been born this winter. A rebellion will form around him. His destiny will crumble your kingdom." The woman then collapsed in the chamber. "Vygar, take all you need. Find this child. Save this kingdom." Chapter 2. Capital L literature has to have lasting impact or tackle hard subjects. It's very common in 2020 for literature to be centered around feminism. It is impossible for fantasy to talk about feminism because there are dragons. Although in fantasy, female characters are always better with swords, magics, and are better leaders. And since science fiction also isn't literature, have you noticed in every futuristic sci-fi story, the world is unified under one leader, and that leader is a woman? Since I got on sci-fi, let me get my Star Trek rant out of the way. Did you know, literature lovers, that Star Trek has had the first interracial TV kiss? Did you know Star Trek had a Russian on an American TV show during the time of the Cold War? Did you know that there was an award-winning episode where there was a planet where two races at war with each other had their face split? Let me elaborate. One race had black on the left of their face and white on the other, and they hated the race with the white on the left and black on the other. That sounds silly, right? Same species looking so much alike, hating each other over such a silly reason? Or could it be the best way to show us what our own racism looks like? Maybe that means sci-fi isn't a look at what the future could be, but a look at how we are now through a lens of a futuristic setting? But if that is the case, then fantasy isn't a look at imagined past, but a look at today through a lens that is a fantastical setting. But science fiction isn't literature, so I'll stop. In the next 3 months, Vygar travels the land under the order of his king and kills hundreds of babies in the name of his church to save his kingdom. He even has the audacity to charge the parents coin for his labor. If anyone can't pay, lies, or just wishes to protect their child, they fall to Vygar's sword. Only 2 babies survived the winter. Persephone, Pavlo's twin sister, has a girl, Emily, born out of wedlock. Pavlo confides in his king. The second King Kelvan lays his eyes on Emily. He knows no evil can come from something so pure. Too bad Kelvan didn't go with Vigar. Emily's childhood is a life of plenty. She spends her childhood amongst the king and noble people. She is educated, well-versed in politics, languages, and other studies such as math and philosophy. Everyone in the kingdom loves watching her grow, except for the thousands of people affected by Vigar's murders. The other of the 2 babies born in the winter lives a very different life. His name is William. He lives far from the towns and cities to avoid the eyes of Kelvan's men. Once his mother and father heard of Vigar's rampage, they fled. That's right, William is not an orphan. Maybe the orphan chosen one trope is overdone, but I understand why. Who wants to read a story about a character whose childhood is fine? As readers, we want to explore a character that has a struggle that we can either relate to or empathize with. This may not apply to Luke Skywalker, but I imagine an orphan reading about an orphan badass named Bruce Wayne who becomes a vigilante and saves the world would be very inspired to ignore their current plot in life and go out to do great things. Oh, comic books, not literature, sorry. So, William isn't raised by wolves. Sorry again. His parents are very loving to him, and very understandably, at ends with their king. To fuel their fire, that is the hate for Kelvan, they welcome travelers to visit them and spend time with William. Many travelers are young mothers who lost either child, husband, or both to Vigar's viciousness. Other visitors are rebel organization leaders swearing their fealty to them should the time come to rise up against the king. William, although not pampered and comfortable like Emily, is also receiving an education. Similarly to Emily, William is also well educated in politics and languages, but not like Emily. William is trained in swordplay, combat, social and economic structures, and intrigue. Sorry. Chapter 3. An arrogant Vigar approaches a remorseful Kelvan in his throne room. Proud of the atrocities he committed, he kneels before his king, his bloodlust sated. He assumes his lord will reward him even further. It is done, my king. My great quest is completed, and the kingdom is safe. Is it? Kelvan spits the words out. Kelvan never looks up. His forehead leaned against his thumbs, his sword held in both hands, blade tip on the floor. My king, where is your court? Vester and Pavlo. Vigar rises and looks around. Did I say you could rise? Kelvan stands as he screams, sword going from both hands to his right. Vigar's armor makes a ring through the empty chamber as his knee hits the ground. You murdered hundreds of innocent people! Kelvan walks one step down, his cape dragging behind him. Children! One step down. Fathers! One step down. Mothers! Step down. Under my banner. Kelvan reaches the floor level 2 paces in front of Vigar. And you made them pay you! Tears stream down Kelvan's face as his sword hand begins to shake. Draw your sword. My king, I could never. Kelvan's foot reaches Vigar's shoulder and pushes him off balance. Draw your sword, coward! Kelvan swings at Vigar's feet with his sword, forcing him to retreat backwards. My king, why? Struggling to stand and tripping over his cape, Vigar falls over, fumbling. Even now, militias rise against me. The hundreds you have killed have led to thousands of deaths. My kingdom is broken because of you. My name slandered. The peace I have brought in unity has been destroyed by one man in the course of a season. Draw your sword! I was following your orders, my king. As soon as Vigar gains his feet and draws his sword, he deflects a possibly killing blow from the king. Fool! I ordered you to find the child! Clash of swords as Kelvan forces Vygar backwards. Find the child! Not kill all the children! Clash! Not kill their mothers and fathers? Clash! Not take their coin? Clash! How many orphans have you created? Clash! How many have you killed in my name, turning my people against me? A high kick to Vygar's chest launches him down the courtyard stairs. Tumbling down, heavily armored, his wrist snaps backwards at the bottom of the stairs under the pressure of his body weight plus armor. He lets out a scream while rolling over to his back, holding his bent backwards hand. Kelvan walks down the stairs, ending above him. He picks up Vygar's sword and crosses both blades around his neck. How can a man who lives his life in God's eyes be so wicked? A bloody, crooked smile crosses Vygar's face. People give gold, women, and their sins to God. I just use them for him. Maniacal laughter gets silenced by a king. Vygar is no more. Chapter 4. Word of Vygar's death makes it around the kingdom. Over the next 2 years, Kelvan, Vestar, and a caravan of 50 men make it around the kingdom to personally apologize to the victims of Vygar's actions. It is a difficult order for Vestar to follow, when Kelvan orders him not to harm anyone unless they physically attack the king. Kelvan gets spit on, insulted, and threatened by dozens of people daily. During the entire trip, Vestar never has to kill anyone. Every family affected receives a lifetime of wages for every victim lost as an apology. Kelvan knows it's insulting to assume it would fix anything, but he is trying. William's location and existence are hidden from Kelvan. While Kelvan is gone, Pavlo sits on the throne and assumes the role of steward, answering requests of citizens and tackling the issues of the kingdom. Emily sits to the right of Pavlo, learning as much as she can. Pavlo has a monument built in the courtyard of the castle. 100 children by 100 different artists. Each artist is paid for their work and travels. Many artists are parents of children lost. On the king's return, he is rejoiced to see the monument. Kelvan sees it and cries. He not only cries for the beauty of the monument, but he cries for all the mothers he spoke to, trying to feel their pain. He cries for the times he was insulted and spit on, knowing the people behind those words once felt pride for their king and country. He cries because he deserves their hate. Kelvan studies each child immortalized in his courtyard, memorizing features, imagining the atrocity again committed by Vygar with every statue he studies. Chapter 5. Light comes back to the kingdom. The era known as the Winter of Prophecy passes. Few forgive Kelvan, and fewer forget. The economy is strong because of Kelvan's apologies, and orphanages are empty because of parents wanting to fill the void Vygar caused in their lives. Militias against the king meet in secret instead of publicly since Kelvan's apology. The general attitude of society is good, but not what it was. As Emily and William reach 18 years of age, they are both most influential in their own ways. Emily becomes just as much as an advisor to the throne as Pavlo. She even becomes so bold as to disagree with the king on occasion. If it better suits his people, he allows it. William becomes infamous and deadly. On his worst day, he can best 10 men in combat with a multitude of weapons. William is so cunning in ways of infiltration that these secret militia meetings don't even expect him when he shows up and rallies them to his cause. Be still, my brothers. I need your patience until the time comes that we can overthrow this tyrant. Usually, his presence and speeches inspire courage in his followers. Very rarely, however, he will encounter opposition. Who are you, boy? Your words alone will cause more death than is needed. A burly man stands pointing a fat finger at him. You will march few against many? What do you know, boy? I know there should be more in this town my age. I know you personally have been affected by the winter of prophecy. Even though I have met you, the way your sad eyes look at me now show me that you lost someone you loved. Your presence in this meeting also shows me that, even if your core beliefs name you a good man, you are here. Why are you here? Perhaps because you know something is wrong. Perhaps because this is the only place where you can live your pain with others who have the same pain, away from others who pretend their pain doesn't exist. You're tired of pretending everything is okay. William looks to the rest of the room. Everything is not okay, is it? The tyrant gave an order that wiped a generation, and still he sits on the throne. He paraded around his kingdom with an army, giving gold and expecting forgiveness. William steps up on the table. I will not forgive him for affecting my life so. I do not expect you to forgive him for taking your lives, for taking the lives of your loved ones and replacing it with gold. And I know of his Emily, his gem he allowed to live. Why, my brothers, is she not a victim of her birth year like your children were? Why does she live in plenty and I live in secret? Why does her mother not feel the pain that your wives and daughters feel when they remember their babes stripped from them and impaled on the holy man's sword? Stepping down off the table and getting back in the man's face, William continues, quietly but loud enough for the room to hear. You ask, will I march against the king? My answer is yes, but I will not march few against many. My brothers, when the time comes, we will outnumber the king's men 30-1, and I shall be in front. I will call the coward king to come forth and face me. I will introduce myself as the one he missed, and invite him to finish his quest, starting with me and finishing with his precious Emily. As my story finishes, I want you to think now, who is the bad guy here? You know, Kelvin is a good king who trusted someone who led him astray. Emily and William are our victims, but should William be waging this war? Why shouldn't he? Fantasy often has good versus evil, or at least classic fantasy does. Modern fantasy kind of shows that we're all human and that we all have different sides. I want to thank you for listening to this so far. This story has a long way to go, but I've really enjoyed it so far. And thank you.